Hello Econo Babies, welcome to the answers to portfolio questionnaire number 4. True-false questions. Question 1 is: a perfectly competitive firm faces a horizontal average revenue curve. We know that average revenue is the same thing as the price of a product. In a firm operating in a perfectly competitive market is a price taker. It has no market power. The firm is too tiny, too insignificant, and identical to all the other grains of sand in the giant beach of the market to have any influence on the market price or to determine its own price. So the price that the firm sells its product at is effectively set in the market. That price doesn't depend on how much a given individual firm produces. An individual firm might produce 35 units of output. The market price will be whatever it is, $10 say. It could produce 50 units of output. The market price would still be $10. It could produce 100 units. The market price would still be $10. Graphically, we would represent it in this way. We show the industry or the market as a whole, and next to it we can put a representative firm which produces a tiny, tiny, tiny sliver of the overall market output. So we draw in a demand curve, draw in a supply curve for the market as a whole. And let's put in some cost curves for our representative firm. The market price will be determined by the equilibrating forces at work. So the price will ultimately come to settle at, in this example, $8. The point where the quantity demanded equals the quantity supplied. And that's the price which this firm, representative firm, and all the others, which are just the same, will charge, no matter how much they produce. They produce 10 units, 25 units, 35 units, 45 units. They'll be charging $8 per unit. Or in other words, the average revenue at every level of output will be $8 per unit. So we can represent that by a horizontal average revenue curve, which incidentally is the same as the marginal revenue curve. That is, the revenue earned from each additional unit of output that the firm would produce. Not an average, each additional new unit produced. Right? So it produces 15 units and it increases it to 16 units. The 16th unit will be sold at $8, so the marginal revenue, the revenue from that 16th unit, will be $8. It increases output from, say, 35 to 36 units. It will charge a price of $8 for that 36th unit, so the revenue from that 36th unit, the marginal revenue, will be $8. Question 2. A perfectly competitive firm earns marginal revenues that exceed the price. Well, that can't be right, given what I just said. If we're talking about a perfectly competitive firm, it's a price taker, so its average revenue curve, and therefore its marginal revenue curve, will be horizontal at the same point, at the market price. If the market price fell, then the average revenue, marginal revenue curve would fall. If the price fell to 400, the marginal revenue curve, average revenue curve, would fall to 400. So it's never the case for perfectly competitive firms that the marginal revenue will exceed the price. It will always be identical to the price. Question 3. In the long run, a perfectly competitive firm breaks even. This is true. The long-run dynamics run something like this. This is the story. First, we have to start off with firms making economic profit. So remember, it's a perfectly competitive market, so all the firms are the same, so they're all making economic profit. This attracts new firms to the industry or the market. Industry and market here are synonymous. When new firms are attracted to the industry, that means that the industry supply will increase. And when industry supply increases, the industry price will fall. And since we know that price is the same as average revenue, the price per unit is the firm's revenue per unit, each firm's average revenue will also fall, as we saw in the previous graph actually. Now you just keep telling that story until the average revenue, or the price, market price, falls to the lowest possible average total cost point. That is, to the point to an output level where the average revenue is just equal to the lowest cost per unit. That is, at a level where the firm is making no economic profit at all anymore. The firm is breaking even. So let's see that graphically. Again, we've got our entire industry or market characterized by demand and supply curves. And we've got a representative firm here in the long run. And we can see that this firm must be making economic profit because we can see that the point at which it's producing, the revenue per unit, average revenue, is greater than the cost per unit, the average cost. So we know the firm is making profit per unit. But that attracts new firms to the market. And when new firms to the market enter, the supply curve shifts to the right. And it will keep shifting to the right while ever there is economic profit being made by the firms in that market. So the supply curve will keep moving to the right and will keep finding a new equilibrium price until we get to such a low market equilibrium price that this representative firm and all the other firms in the market who are the same end up producing at a point where the average revenue just equals the average total cost. That is, this firm and all the others are breaking even. The price they get per unit is equal to the cost per unit, and that cost per unit is at its lowest possible point. Question 4. A perfectly competitive firm will produce a level of output where marginal revenue equals marginal cost. True, we have a behavioural rule which says the firm will keep producing more while ever the revenue from the next unit sold is greater than the cost of producing that next unit, up to the point where that is no longer the case. That is, up to the point where the revenue from the next unit sold just equals the cost of producing that next unit. That is, where marginal revenue equals marginal cost. Here, boop. If the price fell so that the marginal revenue curve, which is the same as the average revenue curve, falls, then the firm would choose this amount of output. If the price fell again, the firm would choose this amount of output. That marginal revenue label there shouldn't be there. I accidentally left it there. I should have deleted it. So ignore that. Question 5. Firms in a perfectly competitive market produce differentiated products. This is false, and it's false by definition. The definition of a perfectly competitive market is one in which each firm produces a product which is identical to that produced by every other firm in the market. You might ask, well, do they have to be literally identical in absolutely every conceivable way? Well, obviously not, because they are differentiated in the sense that, one orange and another orange are not in the same physical space. They're differentiated in that sense. But in terms of all of the other characteristics, they are identical. We might want to say that all that's really required is that the products produced by each firm in the market are identical in the minds of the consumers. And that's really all that matters. Question 6. In the long run, monopolies can earn zero economic profits. That is true. They can. Here's an example of a monopoly, that is a single firm that faces the entire market demand curve for itself. This is the market demand curve. Right? That's all the consumers in the market, and these are the firm's cost curves. We can see in this case that the firm is going to make economic profit. You find the optimal output where marginal revenue equals marginal cost. The firm charges the highest price that consumers are willing to pay for that output as given by the market demand curve. Then we find at that optimal output what's the average total cost. We can see that it's lower than the price, which means the firm is making profit per unit. Fine. So we can see that a monopoly could make economic profit, but could it make zero economic profit? Of course it could. It's entirely possible that this demand curve could shift for some reason. So consumers, for example, the consumers of this product might suffer a massive fall in their incomes. There might be a recession, a whole bunch of these consumers become unemployed, so their incomes fall, so demand would fall. It could be possible that the consumers in this market suddenly don't like this product anymore. Their tastes change, for example, in which case the demand for the product would fall. It could fall to such an extent that we have something like this. There's the new demand curve. You'll note immediately that the new demand curve is just touching 1 point on the average total cost curve. Okay. We need to draw in the marginal revenue curve, which has double the slope of the demand curve or the average revenue curve. Done. What's the optimal output for our firm? Where marginal revenue equals marginal cost. Produces this much. Charges the highest price consumers are willing to pay. And we can see that the highest price consumers are willing to pay per unit is just equal to the average total cost of producing that amount of output. In which case we would say this firm is, although it's a monopoly, it has no other competitors, nonetheless it's breaking even. It's earning zero economic profit. So is it possible? Yes, this is true. Question 7. Sydney Water is a monopoly. True or false? Well, 20 years ago, Sydney Water would have been used as an example in textbooks of a clear case of a monopoly. However, a strange phenomenon has occurred over the last 20 years, and that is the emergence of a rival in the market, at least for drinking water, not for washing up or showering or bathing or anything like that, but at least for drinking. And that rival is bottled water. We now know that apparently at least 1 in 10 households say that their main source of drinking water is bottled water. And it seems that this is increasing year on year and will probably increase further in the future. To me, this is a very odd phenomenon because bottled water is insanely expensive compared to tap water. Bottled water costs around about, or the price is around about $4.20 per litre. Whereas tap water, on the other hand, is less than 1 cent per litre. So bottled water is 2,018% more expensive than tap water. This isn't really answering the question anymore. We've established that Sydney Water is not a true monopoly anymore, but it certainly is the most dominant firm in the market by miles. But we might as well ask, why is there this rise in the demand for bottled water despite the insane price difference? Is it because of safety? No. Bottled water and tap water are identical. I know some people say they are not identical, that tap water is not as safe as bottled water. However, that's just not true. You should do some research on that. Don't consult the industry body which represents bottled water manufacturers. They're a vested interest. Rather consult an independent body such as Choice or something like that. Or there's research papers done on the differences between bottled water and tap water. The conclusion is that by independent studies, they're the same. What about health differences? Well, the Australian Dental Association recommends that people should drink tap water, not bottled water, because tap water contains fluoride, which benefits your teeth. It improves your teeth. So we can't say that the Australian Dental Association is acting in its own self-interest here, because it would be in their interests to recommend that you drink bottled water so that your teeth will rot more quickly and they will have more business. So I think we can take them as being honest about that. What about environmental issues? Well, we know that tap water doesn't use massive quantities of plastic, but bottled water does. The industry body representing bottled water manufacturers say that that's no problem because bottles are recycled, but that's not entirely true. Only 60% of plastic bottles are recycled. So environmentally, tap water is superior on those grounds. Lucky last, what about taste? Well, taste is a subjective matter. Apparently, it's true that in South Australia, tap water tastes a bit weird, and that might be a reason for choosing bottled water. But it's difficult to see why that would be the case in other places such as New South Wales. I think people might think that they taste substantially different in New South Wales, but my little anecdotal experiments that I've done with blind testing, not on myself because I don't care, but on people who do care, turns out when they don't know whether it's bottled water or tap water that they're drinking, they can't tell the difference between them. So it's entirely in their imaginations that bottled water tastes better somehow. Anyway, so why do people buy the bottled water if it's pretty much the same or inferior to tap water? I think we have to look to advertising, misinformation, and basic irrationality on the part of people who are easily influenced. Question 8. If a market is a natural monopoly, then the more firms there are, the more efficient the market will be. This is false. A natural monopoly is, by definition, a market in which it is more efficient, that is, more is produced at a lower price and lower cost, if the market is supplied by only one firm. And in the extreme case, where the market demand is not sufficiently high to sustain the existence of more than one firm. That's an extreme case. Or in an even more extreme case, where there is something about the market or the nature of the product such that a private market, where private firms would supply, wouldn't exist at all. That is, it's not profitable at all for any private firm to supply to the market, in which case a government would have to supply the product. Alright, let's take the least extreme case, where we've got, here's a firm that is supplying to the entire market. This is the firm's average total cost curve, and here's the firm's demand curve, the market demand curve, so it's got all the consumers. So it's producing at this quantity and price. Let's say, just for fun, that we added just one more firm to the market. So we've got a duopoly, right? Would the market be more efficient if we added another firm? Well, if we added another firm which had the same costs as this firm that we're looking at now, then all that would happen is that we would divide the consumers between the two firms. Effectively, from the perspective of this firm, and it would be the same for the other firm, so we don't need to draw a graph for that because it's identical, we would eliminate this market demand curve and say, well, this firm will have half the customers that it previously had. And when we do that, we can see that the price that the firm would charge, that this firm and the other firm would charge, and the quantity that they would supply would be less than if the single firm supplied the entire market. So this statement is false. Question 9. A firm that is a monopoly because of legal barriers to entry to a market is a natural monopoly. This is false. Legal barriers are not natural barriers. Legal barriers are artificial barriers created by governments. For example, in order to enter the market, you might need to have patent or copyright or trademark rights to do so, and you might not be able to acquire those things because someone else has them. In which case, this is a legal barrier to a new firm entering the market. If the government eliminated patent law and copyright law and trademark law, then more firms could enter the market for a particular product. The only thing preventing them is the law. There could also be investment and operating licenses and permits that one would have to obtain from the government in order to enter a market, and the government might decide to only issue one license to one firm, or one permit to one firm. This prevents any new firms entering the marketplace. But there's nothing natural about that. That's a legally generated barrier created by a government. And there could be zoning regulations. So, for example, you might have a certain, say, an industrial area where you have one firm that dominates, that it takes up all of the land in that industrial zone. So there's simply no space for any new competitor to enter the market. You say, well, can't they go and build, across town? Well, no, not if it's zoned as residential, then no, they can't. If the government or the council doesn't create that industrial area by law, then you're effectively locking out competitors. Nothing natural about that. Question 10. Which two letters show the profit maximising price and quantity of this firm? So this is an imperfectly competitive firm, or let's say, well, for our purposes, it's a monopoly. So it has the entire market to itself. It's got its cost curves here. It's got the average revenue curve, which doubles as the demand curve. So this is the market demand curve. Marginal revenue curve, double the slope of the average revenue curve. Alright, now we need to find what's the profit maximising price and quantity. How do we find the the optimal quantity? Well, it's the point where marginal revenue equals marginal cost. That tells us the quantity, G. What's the price? The price will be the highest price consumers are willing to pay. Firms will charge that price. How do we determine that? Well, that's given by the demand curve. So that's given here, which means that the price would be A. So the answer is AG for price and quantity. And that is that.